There we go. Now we're going.
Making progress. All right.
Yeah. So yeah, just a lot of walking and moving around yesterday, but yeah.
Well, that's good. I think your body is thanking you for it, even though it might not feel like that at the moment.
Yeah. So have to get you on a sandboard or a snowboard one of these days.
A sandboard. That sounds interesting. I don't really like sand a whole lot, generally speaking.
It's fun, but it's scary because there's no brakes. You just go. You can't stop. You really can't turn. You're just standing up and sliding down the hill.
But now, is this a beach area or more of a desert area?
Well, this city has the largest sand dunes in Japan. And so it takes place there. It is also on a beach though.
Okay. Okay. So this is sand from the beach.
Right. From the sand dunes.
Right. Okay.
Which happen to be on the beach. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So this area, there's a lot of, it's a kind of a country area. So there's a lot of nature and whatnot. So in the summer, there's the sand dunes, there's hiking. Some people do like sandboarding. And then in the winter, there's a lot of mountains around here. So there's skiing and snowboarding and whatnot. So
okay. I have not done any of that. None of the things you just mentioned I've ever done.
I've done the sandboarding once, and I've done snowboarding a couple of times. Both are kind of scary.
I jet ski.
I think I've done jet skiing once.
Yeah. I lived right on the water in Howard Beach for a while, and I always wanted to get a jet ski since I was on the water anyway. I do enjoy that though. We've talked about that, going from Queens to Statue of Liberty, Coney Island, Marizana Bridge. It's really cool to just leave your house in Queens on the water, right? And just find yourself in Manhattan, let's say, or New Jersey even, without ever leaving the water. It's pretty fun.
Yeah. You pretty much guaranteed no traffic.
Unless there are other jet skis.
Right. But you got plenty of room in your lane. You don't have to,
Right.
This is the traffic jams out there.
Plenty of space. It's uncharted terrain.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I love it.
So
all right.
What's going on with you?
Hey, get ready for the rally at City Hall tomorrow afternoon. And we do have a great lineup of speakers, elected officials, community groups. We've got community board representation there. And so I'm really looking forward to that, demanding transit equity. Of course, I will be the MC, so I've been working on my speech a little bit, but I don't want to be too rehearsed because I like to speak from the heart, but it's always good to feel prepared and know that you have a game plan when you do one of these things, because it's going to be a big event. Right.
You going to be dropping any bars?
I might. Because I realize Queens Link is an interesting thing to rhyme off of, right? Like, so we think something about the Queens Link, and I don't know, there's an opportunity there.
That's what's up. No, that sounds dope. Yeah, it's another thing I got to get finished up in the hours this week. I've got a presentation on Sunday. So we're going up to so we're going up to Tokyo at the end of this week, and my mother's giving a talk on genealogy and researching family tree stuff, and then the next day I'm doing a talk on basic stock investing.
Nice.
So
have you been doing well playing the stock market lately?
See, that's the thing, is I don't play the stock market. I do more long-term investing. So it's safer in that regard. It's said to be, well, it's safer than definitely playing the stocks. So
even long-term though, aren't you still playing the market in a sense?
I guess, but not in a sense that it's like what day trading is, right? Of
course.
Where you're trying to go in and out. Although last week I did jump in and out of a couple of things last week. And so I did come out in the positive, but yeah, minor money.
That reminds me, when I was in law school, I had a professor who was comparing stock trading to dating. And he kind of made the class giggle with his references. He said something like, imagine Joe Investor is interested in Lola Company, and he's not in it for the short term. He's, he really has a long-term interest in her. He's not just looking for the pump and dump. And he would say things like that kind of have like sexual innuendos tied to them, what else? He had a few of those. And then he was, he really was like a comedian with it, right? Because everyone was laughing and he'd be like, what? These are real terms. What are you laughing about? I don't know. Like trying to make it sound like it was really on the students for laughing. Like he wasn't purposely setting that up, right? But he knew what he was doing.
Right.
Another one also, he had the pump and dump. Oh yes, this was a good one. So when people were laughing about him saying pump and dump, he was like, no, like this is not inappropriate. That's natural term of art in stocks, pump and dump. And what I'm saying is he's long-term interested. He's not just looking for a quick buck. And everyone laughed again.
Right. That's what's up. So this is the Queens Link rally talking about coming up.
Yeah, so here we go. Tomorrow, it's Wednesday, September 6th, 1 to 2 p.m., City Hall Park. And you can see the lineup there on the screen for those who are checking us out right now on video. Jumaane Williams, public advocate, Donovan Richards, Queensborough president, James Sanders Jr., New York State Senate, Khalil Anderson, Assembly, Zoran Mandani, State Assembly, Stacey Pfeffer Amato. All of a sudden, that's a tongue twister. Stacey Pfeffer Amato, Assembly member, Selena Brooks Powers, City Council member, and the chair of the Transportation Committee. And the list goes on. You can see we've got more elected officials. We've got more community groups, transportation groups. We even have a union president, Richard Davis from TWU Local 100. So really a strong showing in support of the Queens Link tomorrow at City Hall. I'm really excited to be the MC and to moderate this great event.
Yeah, that'll be good. That'll be good. Hopefully it yields some very positive results.
Absolutely. And I am going to do all I can to live stream it on my page, because I know a lot of people can't make it physically to City Hall on a Wednesday afternoon. And so as I've been doing when possible, I'm going to try to get video of it live streamed right here on Facebook.
Okay, Scala on location.
That's right. So we do have some topics to get into. I know you sent me some things. We were talking pregame here as well.
Right.
What's going on in the news? We've got the New York City local law that goes into effect today on AirBNBs, right? That should affect a lot of people, both who rent AirBNBs themselves and who seek to go into an Airbnb.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, since the Airbnb has become a thing, have turned it into a side income, or in some cases into a primary income. But as you know, it's been, especially in certain places, they've been fighting against it, especially the hotel lobby and whatnot, because people are kind of eating their lunch a little bit with it.
Right.
So in New York today, there's this law that goes into effect. What was that again? What was it?
Local law 18.
Yes. And so what it's basically doing is requiring people that's doing Airbnbs to register with the city, and only in the places where they're living are they able to rent it. So what's happening, or what's going to happen, is if you want to rent something that's less than 30 days, you have to, the short-term rentals, you have to register with the city. I'm not sure if you have to do it for the longer ones, but there was an older law that was on the books that prevented short-term rentals of entire apartments for less than 30 days in New York.
Right.
But they couldn't enforce it, or they're having a hard time enforcing it.
So let's make that point clear, that most Airbnbs were already illegal in New York, but people were doing them regardless. And the city had a hard time cracking down on it. One of the reasons, aside from the registration mechanism that we're going to get now, one of the reasons why they couldn't do it was because Airbnb was still able to advertise those illegal listings and process the transaction. So in spite of them not being legal, there was still a mechanism in place that allowed the app to list them and process the fees. And so people were still doing it really unencumbered. Now, with this new law, Airbnb, and not just Airbnb, right? Other apps like it. There are others as well. Airbnb is
Right. So this would be,
all the short-term
yeah,
rental apps, right? Are covered by
yeah,
this. They are not going to be allowed now to even process these transactions. So it's not just that the rental itself is illegal, but the actual processing of the rental on the app is now illegal.
right. And this is going to cut down people's ability. So for people who do this, if you don't register with the city, you can face a fine of up to $5,000. And they said that right now there's nearly 15,000 hosts that previously offered short-term available rentals across New York City. But as of August 18, the city had only approved 257 of the new 3,250 applications. So they're going to it's going to slow people down on either getting into it or whether they're allowed to, I guess, get into it at all.
Right, right. And let's again make that clear for those who might not realize what is allowed and what isn't here. So a short-term rental is only going to be allowed, even if you register, right? Because you can have to register it, but you're only going to be able to do that if you are staying on the property, right? Like if you have an extra room in your house or something like that, but not if you want to rent out your entire apartment or your entire home to somebody.
Right. And some people, they would buy, separate apartments just for the purpose of renting it out,
Sure,
like that,
sure.
like Airbnb. So that theoretically won't be allowed under this.
But that wasn't allowed prior to this either, right? It's just now there's a better mechanism in place for them to try to enforce it.
Right, right. So, and there was in the article that I read, there was a comment on one of the ladies that was doing this. She has a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, but she lives somewhere else. And she said she didn't want to rent it full time to a tenant, and because she would lose the flexibility of hosting family or friends there whenever she saw fit, like she did during the pandemic, or she used it as a home office during the pandemic. So this Airbnb situation was perfect for her, but this is gonna become an issue for her.
Right.
Someone in the chat said, oh boy, Rockaway will be in trouble next beach season.
Yeah, no, that's not a bad point. There are a lot of people in the Rockaways and all over, especially in more touristy areas, right? Areas that attract out of towners. The Rockaway, they call them DFDs, down for the days, right? People who just come down to enjoy the beach. So it is going to have an effect on the local economy. There's no question about that. And I think it's a valid question to ask. Obviously, the hotel industry pushes back very strongly against these, but should we allow it, or should we be this strict? I mean, I'm assuming most people would agree there should be some kind of regulation on it, but how far should it go? Should it be a free for all? Should we allow the traditional Airbnb? Because as we said, we really don't right now, right? What is legal is not the standard Airbnb rental arrangement that we see. When we think of Airbnb being in place, we're not thinking of this.
Right. And again, I think that's another question I think should be brought up. Should people be allowed to rent out places that they have? Like, I mean, it's their place, should
if it is their place. I mean, what if, because don't forget, this is New York City, right? So you have a lot of people who are renting their apartments in the first place. They don't own where they live. Oftentimes you'll see it in the contract, right? In the lease agreement, when you rent a place,
no subleasing,
absolutely no Airbnb, no subletting of any kind, no short-term rentals. Like, the landlord is renting it to you. You're not allowed to rent it to somebody else.
Right.
Even if it didn't have that in the contract, should that be allowed? Should we allow people to say, okay, I'm going to rent an apartment from this landlord for a certain amount per month. I'm then going to try to make more money by renting it to other people. The landlord didn't sign up for that. I mean, should that be legal in the first place?
Right. So, and then, if we look at it from the consumer point of view, you could say it takes away choice, because Airbnb is a different experience in a hotel, right? Absolutely. The situation, the amenities could be different, the locations could be better or different, because an Airbnb could be in a neighborhood where you're trying to be around versus having to be in a row of hotels where you've got to do more traveling. It could be more convenient. Prices could be better, or they can be more expensive, depends on who's running it. So
Right. And when I was working in the Senate, one of the main arguments that the hotel lobby would use is that there's a lot of racism on the app because there isn't as much regulation, and people on there are not only free to discriminate, not that they're legally allowed to, still have the civil rights laws, but that there's really nothing in place that would stop them from discriminating, whereas the hotel industry is much more regulated. And so that kind of thing is more easily cracked down against on the hotel side. That was at least their argument. I mean, you might not even believe that that's true. If the Airbnb host can discriminate, maybe the hotel clerk can the same way, right? But
Right.
that's at least what they were trying to say, that there are stronger regulations in place on them, and that because people were able to discriminate freely on these Airbnb-like sites, that was happening at a much higher level. And so we needed to crack down on them for that reason. Some people
Right.
would say, and and I don't agree with this line of thought, but you do see, especially more libertarian types, they'll say, well, the market will correct itself. So if they're discriminating, then people will not stop using them and then it can go out of business. Unfortunately, that's not quite the way the world operates, right? It would be
Right.
nice if things worked that way, but we do
Right.
need regulations that we need checks, right? Otherwise, yeah,
Right.
things do get out of hand. And we see that time and time again.
Yeah. So that's definitely good. And that question of regulation was one that also came up with when Lyft and Uber came in.
Yeah.
They're saying like the standard industry, like taxis, which would be like the hotel industry, has to follow these regulations, which has a little bit more of these checks and things in place that
Yeah.
these app-based businesses didn't have, which some things could fall under the radar with.
Right. I mean, and one difference is it is easier. Let's be clear. If you're renting out a place on Airbnb, you can turn someone down for an unspecified reason. You can say it's my
Right.
apartment, my house, my property. I'm not going to accept this booking, right?
Right.
The hotel does have a harder time doing that, right? If someone walks into the hotel, they can lie. They can say, well, there's no vacancy or whatever. But generally speaking, they can't just be like, oh, we're declining to rent you the room for no reason. Get out. You know what I mean? Like that would be much more controversial, especially if it was a protected class, if it was a person of color or a disabled person or what have you, right? Coming in, just being denied access to the hotel. So you can see
Yeah.
how it is easier to, I guess, get away with that type of discrimination on an app like that.
Right. And it does happen. There was several investigations that found that this type of discrimination was happening with Airbnb hosts. But like I said, there's more regulation in the hotel industry, but it does happen there as well.
It does. And the entirety of the civil rights laws in this country really comes from the hotel accommodations, right? That was the famous, that's why we were able to pass civil rights laws at the federal level, because the question is, well, what is a constitutional authority to do something like that? For the federal government to pass any type of legislation, there needs to be explicit constitutional authority to do so. It was tied to the Commerce Clause, the Interstate Commerce Clause. The federal government can regulate the interstate commerce. Hotels clearly are part of interstate commerce because they're often on highways and people are traveling from state to state. They pull over, they go to a hotel. And so that's how the federal government was able to justify passing the civil rights law, saying that discrimination would be illegal. How could they do that? Because in hotels, that was the example used, right? Hotels were part of the interstate commerce system in the country because they were right next to the freeways. People would get off when they were on these long road trips. So, I think the regulation of civil rights as it relates to hotels is kind of inherent. It's like baked into the country. That's our whole civil rights framework kind of stems from that. This Airbnb thing, like we said, is new and been largely unregulated to this point.
Right. So, but yeah, I mean, again, yeah, there is a point on both sides there. Again, with, like I said, it does happen with the Airbnb, probably less in the hotel industry, although it does happen there as well, because it happened to us, to my family in the 80s. We were traveling and they wouldn't rent to us.
Right. So we are joined once again by Sheba Abraham from the League of Women Voters. Thank you for joining us. Sheba, we're in the middle of a great discussion on the new law that's taking effect today. in New York City that cracks down on Airbnbs and other short-term rentals.
I did see that. I read that, but what's unfortunate is that the city will fine the homeowners $5,200.
If they don't
Right.
register.
Right.
Yeah.
So why would they do that when people are struggling with taxes in New York City? The taxes
Well,
are so high.
they're supposed to register with they're supposed to register the rental with the city.
Right. It's a way to make sure that if they are renting their home, they're doing so within the bounds of the regulations, meaning that they're not supposed to just rent it and not be there, just to rent it like a hotel. They're supposed to rent it if they have an extra room in their house or something that they're going to be staying there. Most people on Airbnb don't rent that way, but that's what the law.
Right.
So it's a way to try to enforce that previously existing law. So you have to register, and in addition, these sites, the apps, no longer going to be able to process these illegal transactions. What I just found interesting is I was on the city's website just now, and there's an application process that you would have to go through in order to register. But it says on there, before you register, check to make sure that you're not in a building that's on the prohibited buildings list. So they already have a list.
Right.
It looks like there's 50 buildings that are ineligible for registration for short-term rentals. Interestingly, I'm scrolling through this list right now. All 50 of them are in Brooklyn. It's like no
So landlords can ban the entire building from the short-term rental platforms.
That's what this is. So these are the landlords who are telling the city, we want our entire building banned.
Right. And according to the article on Wired, there's a list of nearly 9,000 buildings across New York City that are on that list of.
Oh, is that what it is? Because I'm on the site, right? I can put the link in the chat. Maybe it's only showing me the first 50 then, because it just has a list. It says building address, and you can scroll through it. And it says 1 through 15 of 50. You click next and it goes to 16 through 30 and so on. But it's only showing me 50 properties on here. But there's also a search bar. So maybe if you typed in your address in a search bar, it would show you maybe a lot more in the database than it's showing on the screen.
But what I read,
it looks like there's a whole database.
So the 50 on the screen that come up are just in Brooklyn.
Okay.
but what I read in the New York Post today was that it was 1 to 2 family homes could no longer rent their properties out. Well, now they were renting their properties in New York City as Airbnbs. Is that it? Or when people came into the country, they would rent their properties out for short-term stays. Is that correct?
People came into the country?
Yep, travelers. People that travel, that wanted to stay, say that you want to stay in some place quaint, you don't want to stay in a hotel, someone's offering your home. So
It's a very common practice all over the country, all over the world.
Right, but now New York City's cracking down on that, correct?
Correct. And like we said, it was really illegal already. Most of the Airbnbs that we think of, when we think of Airbnbs, that was already illegal. It just was very hard for them to enforce it. So now they're trying to make it easier to crack down on it by having this registration system and, try to have some teeth to it, because people were doing it in spite of it being illegal.
Right, but they were doing it for extra income. And according to the article, they said it's doomsday for New York City because the monies that these homeowners were receiving were helping them out, especially if they were elderly.
Well, and that's a very valid question. I think we should be asking this question. Should we be cracking down on it to this extent?
Right. Or should be, maybe, there was a rule in place, like I said, the law was already there. Should there be some way to try to make this easier and to, make some kind of concessions in that law? So people are allowed to be able to do what they do for their home with their homes and whatnot.
Especially
for people who have extra rooms.
Let's put the idea that people are renting apartments from landlords in the first place aside. What if you own the house? Because, like here in Howard Beach, a lot of parts in Queens, people own their own homes. Should they be able to rent them out short term? It is their property, right? Is it a violation of their property rights for the city to tell them no, they can't do it?
Right. And that's what was on the books. Like you couldn't do it for less than 30 days.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think they should be allowed to.
Mhm.
I do think there should be some, you know, it does make set up kind of an unfair situation if the hotel industry has certain regulations to follow and Airbnb hosts can get away with certain things that they can't. So maybe it just needs to be looked at a little bit more in that regard.
Well,
Should,
according to the article, the law was poorly written.
Well, it probably didn't take into, it was probably written before we had mobile apps and things. So,
no, I think she's talking about the new one, right? The new law. That
Right,
was,
the new one.
oh, the new one.
that just-
so
Yeah,
apparently Sheba is referencing an editorial that came out that was very much
Yes.
against this new law.
yes.
Okay, okay.
And they mentioned that the law, and I quote, was poorly written.
Hmm.
And it gave the council, the city council members that said no, I think was like 4, but the majority of those, I guess, who wrote this law or had something to do with the law voted yes,
Hmm.
that it should pass.
Yeah, it passed with a great deal of support in the city.
Yeah.
As I was saying, when I was working, I wasn't working for the city, but I was working for the New York State Senate, and the hotel lobby was pretty persistent in trying to push back. They're trying to get, even at the state level, the legislators to come out against all the short-term rentals. And they were saying things like, you know, listen, if they want to be hotels and treat them like hotels, they should have to be regulated the same exact way as hotels. They shouldn't get away with acting like hotels, but not having the regulations on them.
But don't you think that's a little bit intrusive? I mean, that's my own home. That's my own home. If someone wants to rent a room from me for a day or two, what business is it of the hotel industry?
Because they're losing money. That's why it's their business.
Yeah, that's what they're interested
It's
in.
literally their business.
But fair point.
Yeah,
You know,
it
it is.
is.
Yeah, it is. It's your home. Like you know, how should they be able to stop you from doing something like that? You know,
But what they're
especially
saying though is that you are no longer using your home as a home. You're converting your home into a hotel. So why
Right.
should you have to get licensed and regulated the same way that they are? If now you're going to
Right.
be in the business of having a hotel, like, you know, you could run a business, any business out of your home, but you're supposed to be regulated and licensed. Just because it's in your house doesn't mean that you're exempt from operating under the rules that regulate that business, right?
Right. So this is gonna, yeah, this is definitely going to affect the Airbnb situation in New York for sure.
So I mean, I guess that should be the poll question of the week, right?
Go for it.
Gotta get people's thoughts on this. So the poll question of the week is, do you believe that short-term rentals such as Airbnb should be illegal?
Yeah, illegal or more regulated, but yeah, we'll see. I'm assuming most people will disagree that it should be illegal, because I think a lot of people, it's been around long enough now that Airbnb is a common option when people look for places to stay now. It's not like a
Vacation.
novelty.
Yeah, absolutely. It has become the norm.
Right.
Because in Miami, they have what you call hostels.
Oh
It's
yeah,
not
they're all over.
hotel. Have you heard of
Yeah.
hostels?
I actually went into a hostel. I didn't stay there, but I walked into a hostel in Miami just to see what it was like. Yeah, I'm definitely familiar with it. In fact,
Yeah,
there's a guy in there. I don't know what he was referencing exactly, but his question is, do you want 1 stack or 2 stacks? But I'm thinking like, is it
Pancakes?
the stack of bunk beds that we're gonna be sleeping in? I'm not sure.
Oh,
Is that
yeah, right.
pancakes or
Yeah.
what?
Right.
And you know, my daughter.
Yeah, like a funny, he kind of sounded like a Muppet a little bit. You're like, do you want 1 stack or 2 stacks? This is even me. I'm just checking. Like, I wasn't really serious about staying there. I was curious because I saw it on the street. I was like, what, you know, what's this
Right.
about?
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that you have a lot of Europeans
Yeah.
and people, I would say, like
Yep.
from South America, Europeans, they
Yep.
stay in those hostels when they come to Miami. And my daughter, she stayed in one when she went to Miami, and she said she liked it. She said
Yeah.
she
Yeah.
met, so everybody looks out for one another. You meet people from all over the world. She really, really liked it.
Yeah, I've stayed in hostels before.
You know
They
what?
have
The
something here as
name
well.
makes it sound kind of dangerous. Hostile. right? It's
No,
sound. And there was a
no,
scary
that's how
movie
it
about
is.
it too, I think, right? Wasn't there a
It's,
scary movie called Hostel not long ago?
no,
I don't know.
it's a
I wouldn't
European,
doubt it.
no, it's a European, that's a European for where they stay in those places like that.
Mhm.
So they say, so that they know when they come here, they know they can find hostels. It's just, yeah, because that's what it's called.
Well, and
When
they're
they stay,
cheaper than hotels are typically.
yeah, it
Generally,
is.
yeah, they're cheaper than hotels, and it's just more of, you got like bunk bed rooms, or it can be different types of way, but rooms with a bunch
Uh-huh.
of beds in it, and then they share a common area
Right.
for, you know,
But see, my thing
food.
is this, when I go on vacation, generally speaking, I like to be more comfortable. And even if it's going to cost more money, if I can afford it, you know, I want to treat myself. So it's vacation. So I'm trying to be
Right.
as comfortable and luxurious as I can be within reason. But it's a thing now, right? If I'm going to go someplace and some friends are coming along, even for a political thing, sometimes we go out of state for conferences or what have you, they'll be like, you know, why don't we get an Airbnb instead of a hotel? And
Right.
I'll ask them why. Why do you want to get an Airbnb? And they'll say, well, this way we can cook. And I don't want to cook. If I'm going away, I want to eat out. You know, now I can see if you're going to be maybe staying in a place for a month and you're thinking it's going to be pricey and I don't want to eat out every day. It would be nice to have a kitchen where I can bring food in, or I can see something
Right.
like that. But if I'm going away for a weekend or for a week, you know, like if I can avoid it, you know, I'm not going to do the Airbnb. I would prefer the hotel in most cases.
But you don't cook
Some
anyway.
people, but some people like the Airbnb because it's, you know, they're not, some people don't like the atmosphere of hotels where you're around a lot of people.
Right. Well,
You could be by your, I'm sorry.
no, I was gonna say that when on that point, like it's one benefit of an Airbnb when you're going out with a group, is like you can all stay together, right? And so there's that added, I guess, bonus, especially if it's a family or if it's a group of friends. You can all have it. You have your different room in the house, but you're all in the same place together. And
Right. And yeah,
so
that is
that's
true.
one.
I think the hotel room is more for just sleeping, really, you know, hanging out at
Yeah.
night. When you're with
Yeah.
people, like if you're in a group, you're usually not going to all hang out in a hotel room. Sometimes they do, like caucus weekend in Albany, you'll get like a bunch of people pre-gaming in someone's hotel room. They do that
Right.
kind of thing. But you know, for the most part, I can see that if you have a nice big house that you're renting on Airbnb or a site like that, you guys can all hang out in a living room and a dining room. If you want to cook, you can cook, and it's like you're staying in a house together. I do get the appeal in that, but I prefer
Right.
to have a hotel room and I can order room service and be pampered like I'm on vacation, as opposed to just having a house that, you know, that's like a different setting from where I normally live, but the the quality of life is not any different.
Well,
Looks
why
like
did New York,
Deborah's with you on that one, Mike. She's like, Mike, YOLO, go treat yourself.
Yeah, it's vacation, right? I don't want a vacation to a house that's similar to the house I'm in when I'm not on vacation. Like, no, I'm trying to go someplace nice and live it
but I
up.
thought the Airbnbs are upscale. It
They're
depends
all different
on,
kinds. No, so
right,
here's
but
another thing. I did an
the
Airbnb. So no, they're all different kinds, and sometimes you don't know what you're getting into. You should look at the reviews, but sometimes there aren't enough reviews, or they can be deceiving or whatever. Because I
this is
actually did
true.
one in not Miami, but South Florida. It was an Airbnb, but it was a hotel, and it was a hotel that they apparently sold half of the rooms to private people as condos or whatever. And then they were in turn renting them out. So check this out, right? This wasn't even someone renting out their house as a hotel. They were literally renting out a hotel room that they bought as their own private hotel operation. And so this hotel that you were staying at, some of the rooms were still owned by the hotel. Some of the rooms were privately owned, but being rented by people on Airbnb. And it was very odd. And it wasn't very nice. Like, it wasn't, you know, because you expect it, because you're in a hotel and you expect that experience of a hotel, but now it's not. Now it's just a room that someone owns and they're renting to you, and you don't get the
Oh.
accommodations you would get at a regular hotel if it was hotel operated. You're not going to call anyone for room service. They're like, you're on your own. It's you're
Well,
just
Right.
Mike,
in this house,
you
even
can
though it's
run
in a
into some
hotel.
terrible hotels. You can
Yeah.
get, yeah, you can run
Right.
into some terrible hotels too.
Yeah, Mike, remember the hotel that we stayed in when we went to the Obama inauguration?
Okay.
Remember
Yes.
the whole place smelled like smoke.
We
It
had to
was
go to
like,
CVS and disinfect the room.
yeah, we had to disinfect the room because that was the only thing available.
That's what it was, right? It was the night before the inauguration in January 2009. and
Yeah.
all of the hotel rooms were either booked or asking astronomical prices. That was the one hotel that I think didn't get the memo that it was inauguration weekend, and they gave us regular prices.
Now,
Yeah, it
see,
was
had it been an
pretty bad.
Airbnb or someone's home, you probably would have got a better price
Maybe
I
and
don't
a
not.
know about
nicer
that.
They can.
stay.
They can charge what they want, right? It's all about supply and demand.
Yeah.
This
So
is
it'll be
true.
interesting. It'll be an interesting poll to see what people have to say. And then we also had the poll from last week as well,
Yeah.
where we asked about the Republican presidential debate, asking who won that debate. And we had kind of interesting responses. Some people said Putin won. Had a couple people said Trump won. Someone said
Oh,
Biden.
okay.
Someone said we did. So it was kind of tongue in cheek, I guess.
Okay, but what about of the people who were actually debating, who got the highest response?
Well, one guy was saying that Trump won more or less,
He wasn't
saying that nobody surged enough to threaten him, and only DeSantis could have, but I guess he didn't really perform like he was expected to.
But of the candidates who were on stage, who got the highest response in the poll?
I didn't put the individual candidates' names out there, so I
Okay,
left
so
it
it's
up
an
to
open-ended
people
question.
to. Yeah, I left it up to the open-ended. One guy did comment that VR would be what's his name, Vivek,
Mhm.
is this new shiny object. So I
There's
think
this
that
such
was
thing
kind of
as
what
being
reflected.
overexposed, and
Yeah.
I think he might be suffering from that. And it sounds very weird. It's a concept that I think is a little counterintuitive. I remember, this might be going off on a bit of a tangent, but do you remember when Jin had a single with Kanye on it in 2003, 2004 from his album?
Mm.
So
Jen did an album with Kanye?
yeah,
A single?
so Jin's album on Rough Riders that came out had a song with Kanye on it. And that was when Kanye West was blowing up at the time. His album was about to come out. He had singles all over the radio for himself. Rough Riders was trying to put out that song as a single. And Rockefeller, Def Jam, which was Kanye's label, refused to clear it because they were concerned that he would be overexposed. And I remember at the time, not really understanding that concept. I'm like, why wouldn't they want him on the radio more? That doesn't make any sense. They're trying to keep him off the radio because they're afraid he'll get too much love. But the idea was that they were trying to push his singles to the radio at the same time, and they were afraid the radio stations would say, well, we just played a Kanye song with Jin, we're not going to play his new single, let's wait till next hour or something like that. So they were trying to allow all of their stuff that they owned, right, that was on their label, to get the maximum airplay. And so they were telling people who had him as a guest on their album that couldn't be the single because it's going to oversaturate the airwaves with. So I get that more now, right? When I was younger back then, I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Why wouldn't they want more of their artist on the radio? It does make sense though, if you really think about it. I think that with this guy, there's a possibility he's going to burn out too soon. He's going to be he's everywhere right now, and people will grow tired of him, and they'll think that he's got too much airplay. They're going to want to cut back on that because he's burning out too quick, in my opinion. Especially when it comes to a political campaign, you want to peak on election day, right? You don't want to peak months before the first votes are cast and then be over the hill by the time it comes to election day. So I do think there's a concern that he is being overexposed right now.
Yeah, and I think people are going, yeah, like you said, people are going to get tired of him pretty quickly, I think.
I think so
I
too.
listened to him. I took one day, spent a couple hours going through some of the talking points, and yeah, I was already tired of him.
Yeah.
That's the thing, right? Some people can burn out faster than others.
Yeah. Well, he comes off, personally to me, he comes off smarmy. He's like a very rehearsed, very robotic, very people pleasing. I'm going to say anything that's going to sound good to make you, vote for me. And just, it's very disingenuous. So yeah, she was whack. So another comment was like saying, because I phrased it like who won. Someone a bit contrarian was like, it's not a sporting event to the extent people see it as such. requiring a winner or loser, that means the United States is ultimately the loser in that case. We all lose because of this infantile reductionism of too many theoretical adult Americans who see determining the future of our country through the prism of a football game.
Well, that guy sounds fun at parties.
Very
Yeah, right.
fun at parties.
I mean, the thing is this, it is a competition because people are voting. So
Right.
is that a sporting event? I mean, is that a juvenile sporting event in his eyes? People, it is a competition, right? People,
right.
well, of course, there are going to be winners and losers because the question is who is coming out with the most votes out of it. That's a tangible thing. That's not some abstract concept that we're making up for the sake of inventing
Right.
a competition. They literally are in competition with each other.
Right. And I do get his point of view, or he or she, that didn't specify, but I do get the person's point of view.
That is a man.
Well, yeah, Dave, I see it now. Where people looking at politics like it is a game instead of something a little bit more serious than it is. So I do get that point of view as well. But
people do say that politics is like sports for older people and things like that.
Right. So, but yeah, so that was kind of what we got.
I've also heard it described as Hollywood for ugly people.
What? What was described as that?
Politics has been described as Hollywood for ugly people.
Okay.
Because you could be a star in theory
Right.
on the political stage without having a Hollywood good look.
You ever see that movie Wag the Dog?
Yeah.
You saw.
Yeah.
That came to mind, and Mike made the comment about Hollywood and politics, and that was a very interesting movie.
Yeah, it was. That was Robert De Niro, I believe.
Right. Yes, and Dustin Hoffman.
Right.
And what was interesting, the lady said, "We don't vote." You remember her saying that I forgot who the actress was. She said, "It doesn't matter what president gets in the office, we'll never be affected by whoever gets into office, was the presidency."
So it was a political satire movie.
Yeah.
Whereas because the term "wag the dog" is a theory that where you try to, I guess, create something to make a situation that you want. So instead of the dog wagging its tail, then you wag the dog instead.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's what they did. They constructed a fake war in the media for certain political points. Yeah, it was actually pretty good. I believe it was Robert.
It was.
Dustin Hoffman, Robert De Niro, Woody Harrelson. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, you might like it, Mike.
Yeah.
So we've got a movie recommendation of the week now. I like it.
We do. Absolutely. So,
all right, so
it's not a Marvel movie.
Winner of this debate, according to the poll?
According to the poll, I would say
Drum roll,
no.
please.
I would say no.
No, nobody won the debate.
No one definitively.
Okay.
Well, they said Trump won. Didn't they ask the question, would they still support Trump if he was if he went to jail?
Yeah, so I think, to me, I think that means that he wins, because even though he wasn't there, he was still kind of the focus. So
right, and especially if they had this debate without him and didn't even have a clear winner emerging. I mean, that tells you something.
Right. And he was still a question. Like,
Yeah,
so he wins regardless, unfortunately. So,
all right, well, is that a segue into our next topic here about the mugshot?
Sure, that works.
All right, so you sent me this article. It's fun to look at these things, I guess, from an academic or theoretical point of view, or if you just want to stick it to him as much as possible, which I know a lot of people do. They're always trying to think of other theories, right, that might bite them in the ass. So there is this idea out there that his monetization of the mugshot from Fulton County is a violation of copyright law, and all of the money, I think they're saying it's been over $7 million, all of the money raised since the release off of this image is theoretically not truly his, doesn't belong to him, and could be collected, again, in theory, right? This is all very theoretical discussion, by the Fulton County Sheriff, who would technically own the copyright.
Right. So, yeah, and so generally mugshots don't have the copyright, but I guess technically it belongs to the county that
Right.
took the picture.
Well, generally speaking, copyright is owned by the person who created the artwork, or in this
Right.
case, who took the picture. So if you take a picture, you own the copyright without having to register it or do anything. Just by virtue of taking the picture, you own the copyright. So
Yes.
generally speaking, the Fulton County Sheriff who took the picture, their office, would own that image, right?
Right.
But there are a lot of legal issues that would have to be considered beyond that. Number one, and this article makes a distinction between the federal government and local governments. So yes, the US government is not permitted to own copyright to booking photos. They would be considered in public domain. This is not the US government we're talking about. This is a local government. And so that prohibition would not nakedly apply. But as Jay alluded to, it's still a government taking a mugshot photo. It's not really thought of as a work of art. It's thought of as more something that you would use to process a potential criminal, right? It's like a file that you're keeping on someone, not so much art. And it's very much newsworthy. It's very much a public photo, just by virtue of it being a mugshot, the first mugshot we've seen of a former president. And so is it really subject to enforcement of private copyright law, or would it be considered so far into the public domain that it's essentially fair use for anyone to use it? Plus, you have to look at the way it's being used, right? Is it being used in a transformative way? Is it being used to comment on a news story? There are various fair use factors where even if you could show that someone is prima facie violating a copyright, you still might be able to use it depending on how you're using it. In this case, I think there's a very strong argument that it's being used to comment on a news story, and it is transformative in a sense that he's basically saying, here's a mugshot, and this is what I think of it. I'm making my own political statement on it by saying, I'm going to sell it. I'm going to put it out there. I'm going to be proud of it. I'm going to be the martyr, right? He's doing all these, he's trying to turn that negative into a positive, so to speak. And so I think there is inherent commentary on a news story, something that's so public with,
Right.
to me, it's kind of hard for me to envision a scenario where he could be held liable for breaking the copyright of Fulton County Sheriff in his case. But it's interesting to think about, and it is theoretical at least, right?
Right. And for clarification, after the mugshot was released to the public, Trump took the mugshot, the campaign, and started using it to create fundraising merchandise with, and within that day, I think they raised like $7 million selling merchandise using that mugshot for his campaign.
Right.
I think there's also another aspect on there that we kind of touched on in the pregame where, and the article even brings that up, whereas it is a photo of Trump, his mugshot. So there's also an interest of his likeness in that regard.
But that is when it comes to other people trying to monetize his likeness, right? But even that, though, is murky to me. So are we saying, because how many times do we see people make artwork with a president's face on it? Like, are we saying that's always illegal?
Right.
It's so ingrained in the public consciousness that it's really hard, I think, in practice to enforce these private rights that might technically exist. Like if someone took a photo of you and started selling it, I think it's much easier to make a case that, hey, wait a minute, because there's no expectation that that's going to happen. I mean, maybe if it's in the context of you as an artist, that's a little bit different. But let's just say it's in the context of your private life, or any private person walking down the street. Someone is now selling T-shirts of them and making money off of it. I think that hits different, right? There's an expectation that your likeness isn't going to be used for someone else's monetary gain. But the president and a former president of the United States, I mean, that's just a different ballgame, and they're in a different stratosphere.
Right.
They have laws governing that. in the Fulton County? What does the law say about that for a public figure?
About what? Because now we're talking about two different things.
About the image. When
What
you
is
say
that?
taking the picture and using it for
Well, and
monetary gain.
you mean himself using it or other
Right,
people? Those are two different things.
himself and other people.
Well,
Um,
so when
is
it
there-
comes to other people using your likeness, there are civil rights laws, and it will vary by state. But I can speak on in New York, for example, there is a law that's under the civil rights law that says that you cannot monetize someone else's likeness without their permission.
Right.
That's different from copyright, right? Copyright is when you create a work of art, you are the only person who is allowed to publish it, print it, right? Put it out. And so the theory there is that the Fulton County Sheriff owns the copyright. Now that's not by law. That's not by a local statute. That's just by copyright law. It's just like common law, right? So the theory is that they own the image, assuming that it isn't a piece of art. If we're gonna look at it as artwork, which, you can make the argument that anytime you take a photo, there's an artistic quality to it. But this is, like I said, this is really more for the case of documenting and keeping records of people on trial, people in a criminal justice system, right? So it's a little bit of a different thing. But if you want to make that case, you could make a case that the artwork of the photo is owned by the sheriff's department, and therefore by reproducing it without their permission, you are breaking their copyright. Now, here's another piece of it, which we didn't get into. They would have to be willing and wanting to enforce this copyright. I mean, what if they just let it slide? It's really up to, they're the rights holder. So it will be up to them as to whether they would enforce something civilly against him in that case.
Right.
I find it hard to believe they would. That seems to cross the line into pettiness or something that's really beyond expectation. Even if you technically could make a case, I'm not going to say it's a frivolous case necessarily, but I don't think, let me put it like this, I don't think it would do the criminal case any favors if they also pursued a civil copyright claim against him, because that would make it look like they just are really going after him any way they can, even if they don't really have valid reasons to.
Right, absolutely. And so I think from the article I read, they've reached out to get a statement, but the Fulton County hasn't released any statement in regards to this either way.
They probably shouldn't take a position on it.
Probably not. There was one other thing that kind of brought up as far as the likeness is concerned, where it is murky, but the Trump campaign did say that anybody else using this mugshot that they would go after.
Right. And again, let's make the distinction. They're not saying they're going to go after them under copyright law. So they're not claiming that they own the copyright to the image. They're saying that someone else isn't allowed to monetize his likeness without permission, which is a separate provision of law. But again, it's the former president of the US. Are we saying that you can't sell a t-shirt with the president's picture on it ever?
Yeah, I know. It's
I mean, in theory,
it's interesting. It's murky, but it's interesting.
There could be a claim. I mean, that would make the Trump campaign look extremely petty, right?
What happens if I say New York State wanted a copy of that mugshot? Is that permissible to give? New York State said, well, we want a copy. Let us have a copy of the mugshot that was
everyone has it. What do you mean by a copy of it?
I mean, well, it can pass from state to state, the mugshot.
It's passed throughout the entire world. That's what I'm saying. This is
so
whether it's legally classified as public domain or not, it's very much in the public consciousness.
Right, but if I want to use this, let's say in a small town, he's coming. If I wanted to use that photo and in a small town, say he was coming here and he was being indicted here. Can I use that same photo?
Use the same photo.
I could, right?
So under what context? Are you saying like a wanted photo, or like how do you want to use it?
He's a criminal now, right? Would he be considered a criminal?
An alleged criminal.
alleged criminal. So could I use that photo as him being an alleged criminal in another state?
Well,
Or do I
again, the
need to
question is
take my own
how are you
shot
going
of him?
to, how are you going to use it? So theoretically speaking, the Fulton County Sheriff owns the copyright, meaning unless you have a good reason, unless your use of it falls under one of the fair use factors, then in theory, they could stop you from using it in any way.
Oh,
But
interesting.
there are questions about that. Again, number one,
Yeah.
is it copyrightable in the first place? Is it really a work of art? Because like you're getting at, this mugshot isn't being used for, at least the purpose of the mugshot initially, in spite of how it might be used by others. The purpose of it isn't to create enticing artwork about a former president, is to document him being processed in the criminal justice system. So it's not really intended to be a work of art, right? Copyright is supposed to be for art. So that is one thing to keep in mind. But assuming that you can copyright that is copyrightable, then the question is, do you have a right to use it? Do you have a right to, on its face, break their copyright that you're acknowledging exists, but you nonetheless can still use it? And I would say in most cases, even if it is copyrightable, your uses of it are going to fall under fair use. I mean, here's one of the fair use factors. Fair use of copyrighted works, as stated in the copyright law, for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, or research. Those are not infringements of copyright. So commenting on a news story, I mean, I think that's what a lot of this is. It's even the no surrender, right? The Trump campaign has something that says never surrender or something with it.
Right. So they just use the mugshot as is, and then they put underneath never surrender as a caption, and that was what their merchandise was.
Never surrender, right? So the way I look at it, that is a form of commenting on a news story.
Right. And ironically, that they did put the caption "Never Surrender," but that picture was taken after he did surrender to law enforcement for the indictment. So it's kind of funny.
Right. Now, and another fair use factor is news reporting, right? So if you were to put it out there for the purpose of informing people that this is a criminal, a suspected criminal on the loose, or however you're going to use it, if it was not for any kind of commercial gain whatsoever. And by the way, commercial gain doesn't necessarily mean selling it, right? People get that confused all the time, which we can talk about. But there are no commercial purposes here. It's strictly for reporting factual information. Then
like a wanted poster.
Right. Then it could fall under fair use as well. Again, it would still be prima facie, meaning on its face, a violation of the copyright, but you would have an argument for why you should be allowed to do so, why you're not liable for copyright infringement, because you've got a defense. Yeah, right. Fair use is an affirmative defense to infringement.
So yeah, it's a very, I guess, theoretical mental exercise.
It's very theoretical, and I don't think it would be wise for anyone to pursue.
Right. The only thing I did, the article I did read was I guess the Fulton County Sheriff's Office has a very big budget crunch, and so the article was kind of tying it in because the sheriff had been begging with commissioners because they need funds because of there's poor conditions in their jails, and the end of the article said that basically, like, if Fulton County Sheriff, who's technically or theoretically the copyright holder, decided to pursue this and won, then they could be entitled to damages that could help their bottom line in these issues that they're facing. But so it's all very much of a mental exercise in this point.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen in practice.
No, I doubt it.
Something else, I mean, we kind of touched on a couple of ideas in that discussion. The transformative aspect of it, right? So the article talked about Shepard Fairey, who did the famous Obama Hope poster. And there was litigation about that because that image that was used for the poster came from the Associated Press, which is not a government body, it's a private body. But a lawsuit was filed over that, and part of the argument in that, in fact, the artist filed it apparently preemptively to argue that his use of the copyrighted material was transformative because he took a photo and he made it artistic. He made it look like something else. He turned it into something else, his own work of art. And that is an argument you can make. None of these factors are dispositive. So people get that confused all the time when it comes to copyright. They think you could look at the fair use factors and pick out one of them and say, it's this one, therefore I win. It never works like that. There's always a qualitative discussion of how much, and there's a balancing act. Yes, you did infringe it on this hand, but on the other hand, you have interest in the other direction, saying that you have, you're doing something else with it. Maybe it falls into this category, but it's always an argument. It's never all or nothing. So even when it comes to parody, people are like, oh, if I make a parody of something, I win. But no, you still are on its face violating a copyright, and you can still have a lawsuit, and then you can go into court and argue fair use, and you could argue your parody falls under fair use, but that's a whole lawsuit now that has to play out, and you have to argue why all the factors are in your favor and why the balance of interest is in your favor. So it's not as cut and dry as people always make it out to be. So, so even with this, right, they were saying it was transformative. Well, okay, how transformative is it? And are you really creating something new, or are you really relying excessively on the underlying image, and so on and so forth? With this, though, the campaign didn't really transform the image. They did have a saying under it, right? Maybe they try to make it like a meme, and maybe you can argue in today's world that is transformative because you're memeing an image. So these are all discussions to be had, and they could all play out in court, right? But I think that's worth mentioning, that if they're going to try to argue, like, let's say this was an actual lawsuit and they tried to raise the transformative defense, it's fair use because we transformed it. It's not quite the same as the Obama poster, because that was really a different piece of art that they made. Whereas this is, they're taking the photo and just using the photo and adding some words to it. So, different case, but arguments could still be made there. The other point that I wanted to bring up was the commercial aspect of it. So you see this all the time when it comes to people putting out mixtapes or songs online, right? Posting things on YouTube with music on them. They'll always say, well, I'm not selling it, therefore it's allowed because it's not for a commercial purpose. That's not how the courts look at it. That's not how the law looks at it. They look at it like it's still a commercial purpose if you're using it to make money, even indirectly. So for example, if you're an artist and you have a mixtape out and you say, well, I'm not selling this, I'm just giving it out, I'm just putting it out online for free. They're looking at it as a commercial purpose because you're using it to promote your brand. And then maybe you're selling your other things off of it. Maybe you're selling your t-shirts or your other music or what have you. It's still a commercial purpose. It's not the same as something that's just commenting on news or something that really has no commercial purpose whatsoever. But again, these are qualitative discussions. It's never, you can just pick it off of a chart and say, this is it, I win or you lose or whatever. It's always going to go to court and play out. I mean, if someone wants to pursue it, the underlying question is, do they own this piece of, do they own the property rights, the intellectual property rights? Do they own this copyright? Okay, did you infringe on it on its face? Meaning, did you publish it without their permission? Yes. Okay, now we can have a whole argument back and forth about, did it qualify for fair use, right? And again, that's a whole lawsuit. That's not me or you saying definitively 1, 2, 3 what it's going to be. These are lawyers now arguing back and forth, and it's never that cut and dry.
So I think what you're actually saying is that you should go ahead and do a little bit of groundwork right now. Just in case something prepared in case Lupe Fiasco wants to come after Tupe Fiasco.
Yeah.
Just in case. Just so we're covered.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, no, that stuff drives me crazy. Even when you see on YouTube, people will be like, disclaimer, I do not own the copyright.
It doesn't work like that.
It doesn't mean anything legally. In fact, if anything, you're just admitting that you don't own the copyright to it. So if anything, it hurts you, right? But really, it doesn't mean anything. Yeah,
it's funny. So
they think, well, I'm not selling this, and like, no, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter,
Right. So yeah, and it's, I don't know, it just kind of an interesting point that was brought up here, but still a mental exercise nonetheless.
Yeah. And I would like to see that. I don't think the article even brought up the question of whether mugshots qualify as works of art.
I don't think it didn't bring that up. And this was it was an MSNBC article, and apparently several legal experts, and they even quoted a law professor from a university in there that had walked through this scenario, the possibilities of it. So
right.
But yeah, I don't know. I thought it was kind of an interesting thing. So I think we're hitting around that hour mark. You know, we've been trying to hit that sweet spot.
Doing better with time management this time.
I think we're right around there.
All right. Well, we thank
So-
everyone for joining us. We've had interesting discussions as always.
Yes, and of course everyone in the chat.
What's
The
up,
ones
Vance?
I
Let's see
could
if I
see.
can, yeah, see Vance in there, it looks like.
Deborah, Paul, PJ.
We thank you for joining us. As always.
Absolutely.
Hope everyone had a
So-
good Labor Day weekend.
How about we give Sheba the bottom line this week? I know you came in later, but got a bottom line for us this week?
Well,
In light of
yeah,
the fact that summer is unofficially ending.
yes, it's going to be a steamer it's supposed to be extremely hot over the next 2 days. But with that being said, I would like for the city council to reconsider
Mm,
all that was recently passed. The reason why, because I think it will have a negative impact on homeowners that were using the funds to support maybe their basic needs or purchase things for their families.
So you think that the Airbnbs and the short-term rentals should be allowed to help give people some
Yes.
economic relief?
Yeah, I do. And I think the city council, I would like to see the city council revisit that law again.
And
Okay.
I think it's a fair point. So, very good. And for those who like to follow us, they can check us out on YouTube and Instagram at Nuance Show. You get the replay, the video on YouTube, some good clips and things on both. And if you're doing podcasts, everywhere podcasts are at, Apple Music, Spotify, Amazon, and YouTube podcasts, if you do that as well. And yeah, thank you guys for joining up with us.
Yes, as always, we've got work to do. Catch you next time.
All right.